Remember when two-stroke motorcycles ruled the streets and left clouds of blue smoke in their wake? Back in the 70s, one bike became legendary for punching way above its weight class and embarrassing much bigger machines. We're talking about the Yamaha RD350, a machine that earned nicknames like Giant Killer and, yes, Rapid Death. But there's so much more to this iconic two-stroke than just its fearsome reputation. Today we're counting down 25 weird facts about the Yamaha RD350 that even die-hard fans probably don't know. From its surprising connection to Indian motorcycles to the bizarre Chef Boyardee controversy, these are the stories that never made it into the history books. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button if you love classic motorcycle content, and let's get started. Number 25, the RD letters had nothing to do with Rajdoot. Here's something that'll blow your mind. Everyone assumed RD stood for Race Developed. Makes sense, right? The bike was basically Yamaha's TZ race technology trickling down to the street. But here's where it gets weird. Years later, when India started building these bikes as the Rajdoot 350 from 1983 to 1989, some people started claiming RD actually stood for Rajdoot. Total nonsense. The RD designation came way before India ever touched the design. But the confusion persists to this day, especially in Indian motorcycle circles where the Rajdoot became legendary in its own right. The Indian version was actually quite different too. They swapped out the front disc brake for a 180mm twin leading shoe drum setup. Can you imagine taking one of the best braking bikes of its era and giving it drums? They also detuned the motor significantly. While the original RD made about 39 horsepower, the Indian HT version made about 30.5 horsepower, and the LT Tune dropped it down to 26.5 horsepower. They were trading peak power for economy and longevity, which made sense for Indian road conditions. But still, the fact that people still argue about what RD means shows how this bike created myths that persist 50 years later. Number 24. Early UK bikes had a blocked 6th gear. This one's absolutely mental. When the RD350 first hit the UK market in 1973, it effectively had 5 speeds instead of 6. Yamaha literally blocked the 6th gear. Why would they do such a thing? Well, there was a manufacturing issue with the early gearboxes where 6th gear could occasionally lock up under certain conditions. Rather than risk catastrophic failures and lawsuits, Yamaha just blocked it off. The crazy part is that most riders never even noticed. The bike was re-geared to compensate, so it still cruised happily at highway speeds. These 5-speed bikes weren't hopeless at all. They could still hit over 100 miles per hour. But imagine buying what was advertised as a 6-speed motorcycle and unknowingly getting 5. It wasn't until the 1975 RD350B model that UK riders finally got a full, safe 6-speed transmission. Yamaha quietly fixed the issue and restored the missing gear. Today, those blocked 6th gear bikes are actually collector's items. Some owners have even gone in and unblocked them, though that's not exactly recommended unless you know what you're doing. It's one of those weird quirks of motorcycle history that nobody talks about. Number 23. The 7-port cylinder mystery. The RD350 had 7-port cylinders, which was a big upgrade from the earlier R5 model. But here's the weird part that most people don't know. Those 7 ports weren't just randomly placed. Yamaha engineers spent thousands of hours in development getting the port timing and angles exactly right. Each port had a specific job. The exhaust port was massive, of course. Then you had the main transfer ports, the boost ports, and the auxiliary ports. Together they created this incredibly complex scavenging pattern that improved mid-range power. The thing is, Yamaha never really explained how it all worked. They just called it improved scavenging and left it at that. Tuners would spend years trying to figure out the magic formula. Some would grind away at the ports trying to make them bigger, only to lose power. Others would change the angles slightly and suddenly gain 5 horsepower. It was like black magic. The 7-port design became so iconic that when the liquid-cooled RZ350 came out years later with different porting, old-school riders complained it didn't have the same character. There was something special about how those 7 ports worked together to create that legendary mid-range hit. Number 22, torque induction. Wasn't what people thought. Everyone thought. Torque induction meant the RD had some kind of turbo or supercharger. Nope, it was just Yamaha's fancy name for their reed valve intake system. But here's the brilliant part. This simple reed valve completely transformed how the engine behaved. Before reed valves, 2-strokes had this annoying habit called spit back. At certain RPMs, the fuel mixture would literally get blown back out through the carburetor. Waste of fuel, loss of power, and it made tuning a nightmare. The reed valve acted like a one-way door. Fuel mixture could go in, but it couldn't come back out. Simple, right? But the effect was dramatic. It broadened the torque curve significantly and made the bike much more rideable in traffic. Yamaha's marketing department went crazy with the torque induction name. They put badges on the side covers. They mentioned it in every ad. Dealers had no idea how to explain it to customers. Some made up wild stories about forced induction. The funny thing is, racers immediately threw the reed valves in the trash. They wanted that peaky, narrow power band for the track. Street riders love the broader power delivery. It's a perfect example of how a simple modification can completely change a bike's character, and how marketing can make it sound way more complex than it really is. Number 21. The front brake was revolutionary for 1973. A single 10.5-inch front disc with an opposed piston caliper doesn't sound impressive today, but in 1973, it gave the RD350 class-leading stopping power. Most bikes in this class still had drum brakes. Even bikes with discs usually had smaller rotors or single-piston calipers. The RD's brake setup was borrowed from larger Yamaha models. It was total overkill for a 350cc bike, or was it? Remember, this thing could hit 105 miles per hour. It needed serious stopping power. The opposed piston design meant even pressure across the brake pads. No flex, no fade, just consistent stopping power. Magazine testers went crazy for it. They'd do repeated panic stops and the brake just kept working. No fade, no drama. Just stop after stop after stop. Here's the weird part though. When India built the Rajdoot version, they went back to drum brakes at both ends. Even though the disc brake was one of the RD's best features, they ditched it. Cost cutting? Maybe. But Indian riders actually preferred drums for their road conditions. Easier to maintain, cheaper to repair. It shows how different markets had completely different priorities even for the same basic motorcycle. Number 20. The ignition system was surprisingly old school. For such an advanced motorcycle, the RD350 had Stone Age ignition, breaker points, and dual coils. That's it. No electronic ignition, no CDI, nothing fancy. Just old school points that needed constant adjustment. Every 3,000 miles, you'd be in there with a feeler gauge, setting the gap, cleaning the contacts. Get it wrong, and the bike ran like garbage. Or didn't run at all. The timing was critical on these engines. A degree or two off, and you'd lose significant power. Or worse, you'd hole a piston. Mechanics either loved or hated working on them. The dual coil setup was interesting though. One coil for each cylinder, firing independently. It gave a stronger spark than a single coil with a waste spark system. But it also meant twice as many things to go wrong. By the time production ended, everyone else had moved to electronic ignition. Honda, Kawasaki, Suzuki, all using CDI or transistor ignition. Yamaha stuck with points to the bitter end. Why? Cost, probably. Though RD was already expensive for a 350, adding electronic ignition would have pushed the price even higher. Today, almost every surviving RD has been converted to electronic ignition. It's one of the first modifications owners make. More reliable, better starting, more consistent timing. But somehow, something's lost in the conversion. Number 19. The real horsepower numbers were all over the map. Officially, the RD350 made 39 horsepower at 7,500 RPM. But here's the thing, no two bikes made the same power, ever. Yamaha's factory tolerances were surprisingly loose for such a performance-oriented machine. Port timing could vary by degrees. Compression ratios wandered all over. Some bikes would dyno at 36 horsepower, others would hit 42, same model year, same specifications, wildly different outputs. Dealers couldn't explain it. A customer would complain their buddy's RD was faster, and it probably was. Not from modifications, just luck of the draw from the factory. The variation got even worse over time. As the cylinders wore, the port timing would change, compression would drop. A tired RD might only make 30 horsepower, but throw on new rings and suddenly it's back to 40. Magazine tests were hilarious. One publication would clock a 14.5 second quarter mile, another would get 15.2. Same bike, same model year, different results. They'd blame atmospheric conditions or rider weight. The real answer? Every RD was unique. Racers learned to buy multiple bikes and dyno them all. Keep the fast one, sell the slow ones. It was like a mechanical lottery. Today, with proper porting and modern two-stroke knowledge, builders can reliably get 50 horsepower from a stock displacement RD. Makes those factory variations seem quaint. Number 18. The quarter-mile times beat much bigger. Bikes mid 14-second quarter miles at 90 miles per hour doesn't sound fast today, but in 1973, that was supercar territory for a 350. The RD350 would consistently embarrass 650 and 750 four-strokes at the drag strip. How? Power to weight ratio. At 350 pounds wet, the RD was giving away hundreds of pounds to the big four strokes. When you calculated horsepower per pound, the RD was untouchable in its price range. The launch was critical though. Two strokes are notorious for being peaky and hard to launch, but the RD's torque induction system gave it enough low-end grunt to get off the line. Then that 7-port cylinder would come on the pipe around 5,000 RPM and it was gone. Magazine drag races were comedy gold. They'd line up an RD against a Honda CB 750 or a Kawasaki Z1. On paper, the big bikes should have destroyed it, but from a roll, the RD would hang with them until about 80 miles per hour. From a standing start, rider skill mattered more than displacement. The RD rider who could keep it in the power band would beat the big bike rider who couldn't shift fast enough. It created this David versus Goliath mythology that persists today. Every RD owner has a story about beating a bigger bike. Most are probably true. Number 17, the frame dimensions. Copied TZ racers Yamaha claimed the RD frame was based on their TZ race bikes. They weren't lying, but they weren't telling the whole truth either. The dimensions were close. Similar wheelbase, similar rake and trail. But that's where the similarities ended. The TZ frame was made from lightweight chromoly tubing. The RD frame was mild steel and lots of it. Much heavier, much less rigid. The steering geometry was also lazier. Where a TZ might have 26 degrees of rake, the RD had about 27.5 degrees. Doesn't sound like much, but it completely changed the handling character. TZ racers who bought RDs expecting a street-legal race bike were disappointed. It steered slower, flexed more, and generally felt nothing like a TZ despite looking similar on paper. But here's the interesting part. For street riding, the RD frame was actually better. More stable, more predictable, more comfortable. Yamaha knew what they were doing. The problem came when owners started adding power. Throw on expansion chambers and port work, suddenly making 50 horsepower, and that flexi frame became a liability. The front end would start dancing around under hard acceleration. The whole chassis would twist under braking. That's why serious RD racers eventually started building their own frames or heavily bracing the stock unit. The stock frame was fine for stock power, but it quickly became the limiting factor in any serious build. Number 16. The 1975 B model fixed everything. The 1975 RD350B was the one to have. Yamaha quietly fixed all the problems from the earlier bikes without making a big deal about it. First, they sorted out that 6th gear issue. UK riders finally got all 6 gears. Then they refined the induction system, improving the reed valve design for better response. The exhaust ports got subtle changes too, smoothing out the power delivery. But the biggest fix was something most people never knew about. They added a tiny O-ring to the crankshaft to stop oil from seeping from the primary side into the right cylinder. Sounds minor, right? But this had been causing right cylinders to run rich and foul plugs since day one. One 5-cent O-ring solved a problem that had been driving owners crazy. The B model also got better paint. The earlier bikes had issues with paint flaking off the tank. Yamaha changed suppliers or formulation, and suddenly the paint lasted. Color options improved too. The brandy red and competition green from 73 were nice, but the ruby red that appeared in 74 was gorgeous. By 75, they had the color palette sorted. Magazines barely noticed these changes. The B model tested the same as earlier bikes. Same power, same performance, but owners knew. The B model just worked better. Everything was a little more refined, a little more sorted. It's why 75 B models command a premium today. Collectors know it was peak RD350. Number 15, Americans thought RD sounded like Chef Boyardee. This is absolutely true and absolutely ridiculous. When Yamaha introduced the RD series in America, some moto journalists joked that RD sounded like Chef Boy RD. You know, the canned ravioli. Yamaha's marketing department was horrified. They'd spent months coming up with the race-developed story, and Americans were making pasta jokes. Some dealers even reported customers asking about the Chef Boyardee Yamaha. Not exactly the image Yamaha was going for. The joke persisted for years. Racing magazines would run headlines like "Yamaha serves up speed" with pictures of RDs and spaghetti. It was juvenile, but it stuck. Meanwhile, racers didn't care what it was called. They were too busy winning races and setting lap records. The name could have been anything. The performance spoke for itself. The irony is that Chef Boyardee was actually a real person, Hector Boiardi, who was quite successful. So maybe the comparison wasn't so bad. Both the RD and Chef Boyardee became American icons in their own way. But I bet Yamaha's executives weren't laughing at the time. They wanted to be associated with racing, not canned pasta. Today, the Chef Boyardee jokes are just another weird piece of RD history that nobody remembers unless they were there. Number 14, the Mikuni carburetors made tuning. Too easy twin. 28mm Mikuni VM carburetors sounds boring, right? Wrong. These carbs accidentally created an entire aftermarket industry. They were so simple and predictable that anyone could tune them. This was revolutionary. Earlier two-strokes had finicky carbs that required a master's touch. Change one thing and everything else went wrong. The RD's Mikunis were different. Predictable, logical, want more top end, bigger main jet, more bottom end, richer pilot jet, mid-range flat, adjust the needle. It was paint-by-numbers tuning, and it worked. Suddenly, every backyard mechanic was a tuning expert. Throw on expansion chambers, bump up the main jet 2 sizes, and you were done. It couldn't be that easy, but it was. This created a cottage industry of performance parts. Pipes, reeds, porting services, big bore kits. Everything worked because the carbs could be easily adjusted to match. Companies like Spec 2, Denko, and Allspeeds built entire businesses around RD performance. The VM carbs also had another trick. They were used on tons of other bikes. Parts were everywhere and cheap. Break a slide? The local Yamaha dealer had 5 in stock. Need different jets? They were the same as 10 other models. This accessibility meant RDs stayed on the road when other bikes got parked. Today, those simple Mikunis are still the preferred carburetor for RD builds. 40 years later, and nobody's found anything better. Number 13. The power valve confusion with later models. Here's where things get confusing. The RD350 never had power valves, but when the RZ350 came out in 1983, it did. Yamaha's YPVS system, and people still mix them up. The RD was purely port-timed. The exhaust port was huge and fixed. This gave that classic 2-stroke hit, but also made the bike peaky. The RZ's power valve changed the exhaust port height based on RPM, broadening the power band dramatically. But here's the weird part. Many people think RDs had power valves. They'll swear their Uncle 74 had YPVS. Impossible. The technology didn't exist yet. The confusion comes from the evolution. R5 became RD350, which became RD400, which became RZ350. Same basic engine family, but the RZ was a huge technological leap. The liquid cooling and power valves made it a completely different animal. What's really strange is that US market RZ350s even had catalytic converters in 1984 and 85. On a 2-stroke, it actually worked, sort of, but killed a lot of the performance. Imagine putting a cat on an RD350. The 2-stroke community would have rioted. The RD versus RZ debate still rages today. RD guys say their bikes have more character. RZ guys say their bikes are faster. They're both right. Number 12. India's drum brake decision made perfect sense. We mentioned earlier that India's Rajdoot 350 had drum brakes instead of the RD's disc. Sounds like a downgrade, right? But it was actually brilliant for the Indian market. In 1980s, India disc brake pads were nearly impossible to find outside major cities. But drum brake shoes? Every roadside mechanic could reline them with local materials. The 180mm twin-leading shoe drum wasn't just any drum either. It was a proper race-spec unit that could actually outperform the disc in dry conditions. The problem with the disc was maintenance. In India's dusty conditions, disc pads wore out fast. Really fast. And when monsoon season hit, wet discs were sketchy on India's roads. Drums stayed more predictable. Plus, the drum brake was cheaper to manufacture. This kept the Rajdoot's price down in a market where every rupee mattered. They could sell more bikes by using drums. The weird thing is that Indian Rajdoot owners today often convert to disc brakes. Now that parts are available, they want the proper RD setup. But the original drums were actually the right choice for the time and place. It's a reminder that sometimes better technology isn't actually better for everyone. Context matters. The Rajdoot's drums were a smart engineering decision, not a compromise. Number 11. The fuel consumption was genuinely terrible. Everyone jokes about 2-stroke fuel consumption, but the RD350 took it to another level. When ridden hard, it could literally get single-digit fuel economy. We're talking 8 or 9 miles per gallon. That's not a typo. 8. miles per gallon. The fuel tank held about 3 gallons. Do the math. At full throttle, you had maybe 25 miles of range. Maybe. Riders carried spare fuel bottles on long rides, not for emergencies, but for regular fill-ups. The torque induction system helped at cruise, where you might see 25 miles per gallon. But who bought an RD350 to cruise? The moment you twisted the throttle, you could watch the fuel gauge drop. Some owners installed larger tanks from other Yamaha models. Others just accepted it and planned their rides around gas stations. Racing fuel made it even worse. High-octane fuel burned even faster. A track day could cost more in fuel than tires. The oil consumption was significant too. Remember that half-gallon auto lube tank? Heavy riding could empty it in a few hundred miles. You were basically burning a fuel oil mixture that would make a diesel blush. But nobody cared. The performance was worth it. When gas was cheap, 8 miles per gallon was just the price of fun. Today, with fuel prices what they are, that consumption seems insane. But that was the two-stroke bargain. Incredible performance, terrible economy. Number 10. The Rapid Death. Nickname was earned. Rapid Death wasn't just a clever play on RD. These bikes genuinely killed people. The power band was vicious, nothing, then wham! All the power at once. Inexperienced riders would grab a handful of throttle in a corner and immediately high side. The front wheel would come up without warning. The back would step out if you looked at it wrong. In the rain? Forget it. That narrow power band meant you were either going too slow or way too fast. There was no middle ground. The lightweight that made it so quick also made it unstable. Crosswinds would blow you across lanes. Tank slappers were common above 90 miles per hour. And those brakes we praised earlier? They were too good. Grab a handful of front brake and you'd be over the handlebars before you knew what happened. No anti-lock, no safety nets, just you and physics. Insurance companies hated them. Rates for young riders were astronomical. Some companies wouldn't insure them at all. They knew the statistics. But here's the thing. Experienced riders loved all of this. The danger was part of the appeal. It kept you focused, kept you sharp. Every ride was an adventure. Modern bikes are faster and safer, but they don't have that raw, unfiltered edge that made the RD special, or dangerous, depending on your perspective. Number 9, the racing success was absolutely dominant. The RD350 dominated club racing like nothing before or since. In the right hands, it was unbeatable in production racing. The engine responded to modifications like nothing else. Expansion chambers, port work, and proper jetting could easily get 50 horsepower. Some builders are then seeing 60 with big bore kits. More than 50% power increase with basic mods. At the track, RDs were everywhere. The paddock sounded like a swarm of angry bees. The blue smoke was so thick you could barely see, but the lap times were incredible. In production racing, RDs would regularly beat bikes with twice the displacement. The lightweight chassis and brutal power band were perfect for tight tracks. By the late 70s, racing grids were basically all RDs. If you wanted to win, you rode Yamaha. This created a problem for race organizers. Spectators were getting bored watching RD-only races. Some clubs created separate RD classes just to give other bikes a chance. The dominance continued into the 80s. Even when the RZ came out, racers stuck with RDs. They knew them, trusted them, and had years of development. Parts were everywhere. Knowledge was widespread. Everyone knew how to make them fast. Today, vintage racing grids are still full of RDs. 40 years later, and they're still winning races. The formula was just that good. Number 8. Kenny Roberts started the Yellow Revolution. When Kenny Roberts won the 1978 500cc World Championship on a yellow Yamaha, it changed everything. Suddenly, everyone wanted a yellow Yamaha, including RD owners. The problem? Yamaha never made a yellow RD350, so owners made their own. Paint shops couldn't mix yellow paint fast enough. Every other RD was being resprayed in Kenny Roberts yellow. It became the must-have color. Yamaha eventually caught on and offered yellow on the RD400, but original RD350s never got the option. This created a weird situation in the used market. Yellow RDs were everywhere, but none were original. Buyers had to detective out which bikes were resprays. Some were professional jobs that looked factory. Others were garage specials with rins and overspray. The yellow craze lasted well into the 80s. Even when Roberts left Yamaha, the color remained iconic. Speedblock yellow became synonymous with Yamaha performance. Today, collectors argue about yellow RDs. Some say period-correct resprays should count as authentic. Others insist on factory colors only. It's a debate that'll never be settled. But one thing's certain, Kenny Roberts sold more yellow paint than any racer in history, and most of it went on RD350s that were never supposed to be yellow. Number 7. The toolkit was surprisingly complete. Japanese toolkits were usually a joke. A few cheap wrenches and maybe a screwdriver. The RD350's toolkit was different. It had everything. We're talking full set of combination wrenches, multiple screwdrivers, spark plug wrench, even feeler gauges for setting the points. This wasn't random. Yamaha knew RD owners would be constantly fettling. Points needed adjustment, carbs needed tuning, plugs needed changing. A lot. The tool roll itself was quality. Heavy vinyl with proper pockets for each tool. Not the tissue paper pouches that came with other bikes. The tools were actually decent quality too. You could genuinely maintain the bike with just the factory kit. Try that with a modern motorcycle. Here's the weird part. Many RD toolkits are worth serious money today. Complete original kits sell for hundreds of dollars. Individual tools go for 20 or 30 bucks each. Why? Because owners immediately lost them or threw them away. Who wanted to carry around 2 pounds of tools? Plus, they were actually useful, so people put them in their garage toolbox and forgot they came with the bike. Finding an RD with its complete toolkit is like finding a unicorn. It almost never happens. When it does, collectors go crazy. That toolkit adds significant value to a restoration. Number 6. The side stand. Recall nobody remembers. In 1974, Yamaha issued a recall for RD350 side stands. The problem? They could fold up while riding if you forgot to fully retract them. This would lock the rear wheel. At speed, this was catastrophic. Riders were crashing and Yamaha had to act. The fix was simple: a stronger spring and a modified stop. Dealers could do it in 10 minutes. But here's the thing, most bikes never got fixed. Owners either didn't know about the recall or didn't care. "I always check my side stand," was the common response. Fatal last words for some riders. The scary part was how easily it happened. Lean the bike left, stand touches down, starts to fold, catches on something, bang, locked rear wheel. No warning, no chance to recover. Some states started requiring side stand switches because of accidents like this. Bike won't start unless the stand is fully up, but that didn't come until years later. The RD recall got buried in history. Today, most RD owners have no idea their side stand might be a death trap. The few who know immediately check which spring is installed. It's a tiny detail that could save your life. But after 50 years, who remembers a small recall for a spring? Yamaha does. They still have the service bulletin on file, part number and everything. Number 5. The cylinder head design was deceptively simple. 2-strokes don't have cylinder heads like 4-strokes. No valves, no camshafts, just a simple dome-shaped cap with a spark plug hole. The RD's heads looked like pot lids, but that simplicity was deceptive. The combustion chamber shape was critical. Squish bands, compression ratios, flame propagation. Get any of it wrong and you'd lose power or hole a piston. Yamaha spent thousands of hours getting it right. The squish band width was precisely calculated to create turbulence at TDC. This mixed the fuel better and prevented detonation. The compression was conservative at 6.5 to 1, but this let it run on regular gas. Tuners immediately started modifying heads, milling them for more compression, reshaping the combustion chamber, adding extra squish. Some gained power. Many destroyed engines. The factory knew what they were doing. Those simple-looking heads were actually sophisticated. The dome shape, the plug position, the gasket surface, everything was optimized. Here's what's really interesting. Yamaha barely changed the head design from the R5 through the RD400. Nearly a decade of production with the same basic head. Why? Because it worked. Modern 2-stroke tuners have computerized the whole thing. CFD analysis, CNC machining, precise calculations, and they often end up with something very close to what Yamaha designed with slide rules in 1970. Number 4. The expansion chamber. Aftermarket was insane. When the RD350 hit America, the expansion chamber business exploded. Literally dozens of companies started making pipes. Denko, Allspeeds, Spec 2, Higspeed, Gemco. Every garage with a tube bender was suddenly an exhaust manufacturer. The variety was staggering. Short pipes, long pipes, high pipes, low pipes. Some looked like plumbing disasters. Others were works of art, and they all claimed to add 10 horsepower. The truth, most were junk. They'd make noise, but not power. The math behind expansion chambers is complex. Get the divergent and convergent cone angles wrong, and you've got an expensive noisemaker. But a few companies got it right. Spec 2's pipes were legendary. They'd add legitimate horsepower and move the power curve around. All speeds made beautiful stainless chambers that performed and lasted. The scene was wild. Riders would try different pipes every month, chasing that perfect power band. Dyno shops made fortunes testing combinations. Magazines ran endless comparison tests. The sound was incredible. Or awful, depending on your perspective. A piped RD at full song could shatter windows. Neighborhoods banned them. Cops targeted them. Some states tried to outlaw expansion chambers entirely. Today, original period chambers are collector's items. A set of Spec 2s can cost more than a whole RD. The Chinese make replicas, but they're not the same. There was something special about those original American-made pipes. Number 3, the electric start nobody wanted. Here's something bizarre. Yamaha actually developed an electric start RD350. They built prototypes, tested them, had them ready for production. Then, they killed it. Why? Wait. The starter motor, bigger battery, and reinforced cases added almost 40 pounds. On a 350-pound bike, that's a huge penalty. Plus, it killed the whole giant killer image. The RD was supposed to be light and raw. Electric start was for touring bikes and old people. Not for young hooligans buying RDs. There was also a reliability concern. Two-strokes are hard on starters. The high compression and tendency to flood meant the starter would get a workout. Warranty claims would be expensive. The prototypes still exist in Yamaha's museum. They look completely stock except for a bulge on the left case. Weird to see an electric start button on an RD tank. Some custom builders have actually retrofitted electric start using parts from other bikes. It can be done, but it's complex and expensive, and most RD guys think it's sacrilege. The kickstart was part of the experience. That ritual of finding TDC, giving it just the right kick. When it fired on the first kick, you felt like a hero. When it didn't, well, that built character or calf muscles, sometimes both. Number 2, the California models were completely different. California RDs were neutered, there's no other way to put it. Emissions regulations meant California bikes got smaller carburetors, restrictive airboxes, and lean jetting. Power dropped to about 33 horsepower. But here's what's really weird, they had different cylinder porting. Yamaha actually manufactured special California spec cylinders with more conservative port timing. Less overlap, less emissions, less power. The exhaust pipes were different too. More baffling, more restriction. They were quieter, but the performance loss was significant. California riders immediately swapped in 49 state parts. California RDs also had additional emission stickers and equipment. Charcoal canisters, sealed fuel caps, vapor recovery systems. It looked like a science experiment under the seat. The strangest part, these California models are now valuable. Collectors want them because they're rare. Most were converted to 49 state spec decades ago. Finding an unmolested California RD is nearly impossible. Nobody wanted them then. Everyone wants them now. Yamaha hated making them. The complexity of manufacturing two different versions for the US market was a nightmare. It's one reason they eventually gave up on two-strokes entirely. The regulations were getting impossible to meet, but it shows how much Yamaha wanted to sell RDs in California. They went through all that trouble for what was probably a few thousand units. That's dedication, or desperation. Number 1, the spiritual successor. Nobody talks about, everyone knows the RZ350 replaced the RD. Liquid cooling, power valves, modern technology, but there was another successor nobody remembers. The RD350 LC. LC for liquid cooled. It was sold everywhere except America. This was basically an RD350 with RZ technology, but keeping the RD name. It had the same basic engine architecture, but with liquid cooling and YPVS power valves. It made about 59 horsepower stock. Nearly 60 ponies from 350cc. The chassis was updated too. Better brakes, better suspension, better everything. It was what the RD should have evolved into, but Americans never got it. While the world got the RD350 LC, America got the RZ350 with catalytic converters. It's like Yamaha was punishing American riders for emissions regulations. The RD-LC was sold until 1995 in some markets. Think about that. The basic RD design survived for over 20 years, from 1973 to the mid-90s. That's an incredible run. The really frustrating part? The RD-LC was better than the RZ in many ways. It had the RD's character with modern reliability. It was the perfect evolution of the breed, but it's been completely forgotten by history. Today, RD-LCs are starting to get collected, people are realizing what they were, the missing link between the raw RD and the sophisticated RZ, the bike America should have gotten but didn't. And there you have it, that's 25 weird facts about the Yamaha RD. 350 that most people never knew. From blocked gears to Chef Boyardee jokes, from Indian drum brakes to California's neutered models, this bike had more quirks and stories than any motorcycle deserves. Did any of these facts surprise you? Do you have your own RD story that we missed? Drop it in the comments below, because the RD community loves sharing these tales of two-stroke madness. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into motorcycle history, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We've got plenty more stories about the bikes that shaped motorcycling, and trust me, they're all just as weird as this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.